From massage therapist to courtroom expert, Rosalind Nelson's journey proves that life experience might be your greatest asset in forensic psychology when assessing everything from psychopathy to cultural nuances in domestic violence. Professionally Psyched is the podcast that brings you cutting-edge psychology research and real-world insights from our psych community of clinicians, researchers, and educators alike. In our special alumni spotlights, we chat to graduates from our psychology degree programs about how their skills learnt in the classroom have become powerful tools supporting diverse career journeys and successes. Hi everyone and welcome to Professionally Psyched. I'm Jessica Muller, PhD candidate in Public Health at James Cook University, and before we get started we'd like to acknowledge the custodians of the land on which we record, and for me today that's the Bindal and Wulgurukaba peoples. And I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and cultures from wherever you may be tuning in from across the country. In this alumni spotlight, Dr. Amanda Krause speaks with Rosalind Nelson, a forensic psychologist who graduated from James Cook University after a fascinating career path through social work and alternative health. Rosalind reveals how her own adventurous path became invaluable when understanding criminal behaviour. So grab your headphones and get ready to get professionally psyched about the unexpected ways your psychology degree can launch you into high-stakes roles across prisons, detention centres, and immigration cases. Enjoy.
Rosalind, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. To start, could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Rosalind Nelson, and I'm a psychologist, and I trained forensically at JCU and qualified in 2013.
Excellent. And I imagine there were quite a few steps from undergraduate through the training to get to where you are today. So could you walk me through a little bit of your journey?
Yes, I was always interested in psychology because I was always interested in people. Diversification, I think, of people, minority groups, disadvantaged groups, how we get treated generally, whether it's health, educationally or in law. And obviously, I think a lot of us want to look at our own behaviours and our own pasts and our own futures if we want to break family patterns. I think often we have a selfish interest in we want to understand ourselves better and also our partners, families, friends and the general public. So I did my degree late in life. After I qualified, before that was social work, and then it was body work and massage therapy and alternative health, and then psychology. So I went from big world problems to body problems to more mind problems, and then particularly more forensic. So I've just kind of, I suppose, honed in.
Yeah, and I know a lot of our students come having watched certain TV shows and they're quite interested in the forensic side of things. Can you tell me more about sort of what it is that you do having that qualification?
Behaviour and the law is forensics, basically, because you want to look at why did this happen? Was it normal behaviour, abnormal behaviour? Was the law broken? And so I look at it quite simply like that. And so it can be anything from accidents to drug and alcohol to domestic violence to whether it's violence or sex crimes or advising courts on behaviours. Pre-sentence reports, working with criminal populations or working with general populations where there's been aberrant elements of behaviour that is kind of more unusual, that affects obviously people's ability to stay on the right side of the law. So personality, severe personality disorders and things like that, really.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you've done some work with the youth detention center as well as the adult population. So are you working across the age spectrum in the work that you do?
Yes. So I wanted to get as much experience from probably aged 14 to 80, as it were. I don't treat children, but I do see 14 or 15-year-olds who've broken the law or suicidal or psychotic upwards, and aged populations too. So I started my training and did placements at Townsville Correctional Complex, which is the prison here. And I worked in the female section for a while. And then later I came back and then worked in the men's section. And then after that, I did a stint at Cleveland Youth Detention Center in 2010, actually. And I was their psychologist for a couple of years, working with youth, anywhere from 10 to 18. And predominantly, we all know that there's a large percentage of Indigenous population that gets incarcerated because of lack of equality and lack of access to human rights and conditions to do with housing, education, health, and everything else. And they get caught up and often end up more predominantly in our jails and youth detention centres. So then it gave me kind of a wider appreciation for Indigenous culture and how the law affects them, which is quite different from the rest of us, white folk.
What has been the best asset from your training to prepare you to go and do that kind of work?
Life experience, probably.
Mm.
Very kind of wide life experience. I probably scooted around the edges of forensics issues in my 20s, drug, sex, rock and roll. Luckily, didn't get charged with anything, but I've got an appreciation for people that I was hanging out with or associating with, or kind of things that I was caught up in on the edge of watching and observing trajectory of what happens to people, why they were like that, what kind of backgrounds they came from, how they were treated differently, what was it that I had that didn't let me go onto a criminal lifestyle that pulled me back. And so looking at differences of people, of those who get caught and those don't, and those who break the law and those don't, and then how we're treated, and people's resiliency factors of when we've had various life experiences that have been unpleasant or traumatic, how we get through them. And we know that it's not what was done to you, it's how you react to the situation, because everyone deals with things differently. And I'm very interested in that, because there's survivors and there's people who don't survive.
What sort of continuing professional development do you do to stay on top of the work that you're doing?
I think because I have such a fascination with people and forensics and behavior, that I'm constantly and always going on anything to do with continued professional development.
PD?
That's the one. That's the one. And so I've always used to go on, when I was a member of the Forensic College, I went on kind of national conferences. I went on anything to do with trauma or PTSD, or looking at courses that had to do with, say, antisocial personality disorder, looking at differences in psychopathy, rating scales, assessment, writing pre-sentence reports, being a witness in court, doing anything related to do bettering my knowledge, my training, my skills, to prepare me for any of those situations of having to either be a witness in court or provide a pre-sentence report, and be up to date on the latest technology to do with how the brain changes, how the law changes, as we get better and more knowledge regarding treatments like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprogramming, or biofeedback neurotherapy, and so then more brain training to do with neuroplasticity, that people aren't locked now in their behaviors, that things can change. And so looking at all of that. And so as new developments in education and therapy and strategies come about, of getting on top of them, probably because I'm heading towards retirement now, I'm slowing down. At the end of my career, as it were, I'm happy with all of the things that I've engaged in and courses that I've done that have helped me in the forensic field.
Sure. Do you have the opportunity to get involved in research in your role, or is it more as a consumer of that to put it into practice?
I'm interested in research. So occasionally I'm a student of research, like, if I get sent something, I can then fill it out as a participant, but I don't do any research myself. But if new papers come out looking at changes in behavior and changes in how we assess psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder, or what's effective, what's not, because things often, 5 years down the track are not seen to be effective and then need to be redundant, and then new things come in and they're validated. So I'm quite interested in keeping up and reading, but I don't do research myself.
Yeah, but it sounds like you still very much are using those skills of unpacking research evidence is showing to be evidence-based. I wanted to follow up on something else that you were saying around. Could you tell me a little bit more about the liaising or the work that you do with courts?
In our training, we went through the effects of social behavior. And so simple things regarding how forensic psychology can be really interesting is the fact that we all know that we've got heuristics and we've got biases and we've got negative biases. And so simple things, and I'm going to be a bit sarcastic here, but in the old days, it used to be that if a woman wore a short skirt and, then they'd been sexually assaulted, she was asking for it. And so often, it was looking at how we had views and values that affected our judgments on biases alone, nothing to do with facts. Whether black men get charged more than white men, whether someone's good looking and charismatic and wearing a lot of gold, are they seen to be a gangster or and so simple things can really affect behavior and our judgment call about whether we see that person as innocent or not. And I find that really interesting. And I think it's awful, the fact that, for a lot of years, courts have just gone ahead, people get picked, we use all our biases, and they're not very accurate. So I think having psychologists either attached to courts or sometimes being called in to, advise and just give people some support regarding staying with the facts, and it's not about opinions and judgments, I think is really important. But I think these days often it's quite covered. The law has changed. With actually courts myself, not a lot of experience, but I was really interested in the training of what goes down. Absolutely. I've had many subpoenas for my files, but I haven't been called as an expert witness. But I did a lot of training and courses, like Phil Watts runs courses and has done for decades now, on preparing you for providing evidence in court as an expert witness.
Speaking of preparing, I wondered if you could think back to what you might tell yourself, and sort of thinking about advice that you might have for our current undergraduates who might be interested in seeking out a path to forensics.
I would say probably do a clinical degree and do a forensic degree at the same time. My biggest loss was the fact that I didn't realize, to be blunt, the pay differences, and that you have generalist psychologists, and then it was the big clinical, and then you could sideline into forensics, educational, organizational, whatever. So when you're actually seeing clients, the Medicare rebate is a lot more for clinical than it is for generalist. And so if I'm seeing, the general public who want to consult with me, and it's not through a court or a lawyer and people paying private fees, then I get paid the same as a generalist. And I would say to anybody, so until that, don't train in forensics without, do a doctorate. Do a doctorate. So if you've got clinical and forensics, then to protect yourself and financial losses, that's better. If you want to stay in the forensic field and work only in forensic fields, which means that people then have to consult you to do then profiles or forensic assessments, and the courts are paying you or private firms are paying you, well and done. But if you actually like working with people like I do and consulting, then you won't get recompensation for your time and expertise. And I think that's appalling.
There's certainly so many pathways and variations of who you might be working with or, liaising with through this work. And you just mentioned consulting, and I wondered if you might be able to talk a little bit more about what you mean by being a consultant.
Okay, so I worked for an organization in New South Wales, LCS Psychology, and they invited me to be an assessor for family violence. And so they had a contract with the Department of Immigration, which was DEAC at the time. It's now called Border Protection, but it was Department of Immigration and something around the DEAC. And so when people came over here on certain visas, migrants from other countries, and got married, and then their marriage fell apart because of domestic violence, often the person got shipped back to wherever they came from. And so if there was a case of domestic violence, they were entitled to stay because it wasn't safe for them to return. And so I had to assess them. So I did double forensic, they call double bind forensic. So you would kind of do an interview, and then you would do an assessment and an interview, and then you would compare their story versus your story versus an assessment. And then you would have to look at, was it coming together? Were there any discrepancies between what they said and what you found? And was it because they just wanted to stay, or was it the fact that they were in danger? So it was a lot of responsibility, because in a way, your report actually then decided whether they would go back or whether they would stay. So it was really interesting, because then it got me into looking at cultural differences in attitudes towards women and violence. And so when I was looking at, say, when someone was Iranian or Turkish, and, obviously there's a completely different, way of obviously dealing with women over there than there is here, because of politics and lifestyle and religion and culture, of having to look at the nuances involved in what we call domestic violence versus what they thought was domestic violence, because after all, we're looking at Australian law here. But I had to take into consideration what was happening culturally regarding the sensitivities. And so there was many times when I had to deem the person needed to stay because of safety and security, because what wasn't acceptable to us was acceptable to their culture, and therefore they were protected to stay. So that was really interesting. So I really enjoyed doing that. And I'd get flown around. So I flew all over Queensland. So I would get a couple's name, usually a man or a woman, and sometimes I'd interview the other half. And then I would fly and interview them over a period of 2 or 3 days. And then I'd write the report up. And then that would go back to the consortium that then submitted it back to immigration.
How interesting. And I suppose even for me, just listening to the type of work that you do, it sounds like you do have to do quite a lot of writing, even though you are talking to other people field. It sounds like there's quite a lot of report writing.
Absolutely. There's a lot of report writing, yes. And the same as when I was working in the prison system, if we were writing pre-sentence reports. I mean, you're interviewing people, you're getting to know them, you see them over many, many weeks over a period of time of their incarceration. And then you have to write, a report regarding kind of the propensity of the likelihood of risk of violence again. And so you're using various statics and stables and personality measures to look at violence or sexual violence or reoffending levels, to look at recidivism, because that's what the public expect. They expect that you to go in as an expert to assess these people so they can make judgments on whether these people, should be reintegrated back in the community or the risks are too high. No, they need to be kept in and then monitored further, or further rehabilitation and programs or whatever. So there's a lot of responsibility. It's who wrote the report? Why did you let them out? I think that's very complex, and a lot of people don't understand the complexities. And I think the more psychologists can work in these areas, the better, to understand behavior and risk. And it's very complex and it changes.
Yeah, certainly. And thinking of those changes, is there a big issue you see that maybe our future graduates in psychology are going to really have the chance to tackle?
I think the main thing is probably, I would always advise, if you're going to enter a profession, do you use the profession? If you're going to be a hairdresser, have you had your hair cut? If you're going to be a massage therapist, how do you like people touching you? It's always helpful and useful for people to look at their own baggage and their own belief systems, and have they had therapy? Would entering psychotherapy help with the relationship of understanding the them and us approach of, we can all at different times be together or untogether. We're not experts in everything. And so we seek experts to boost our skills so we can manage better, whether it's having kids or getting married or processing drug and alcohols or grief or whatever. So sometimes we need professionals in those areas to help us get through those. So I think it's really good to look at one's own, to have some insight and some self-reflection on what are areas that I have sought help in or need help in or would be beneficial. So I could look at the therapeutic relationship, because you learn so much.
Yeah.
You don't go in green. You go in having tried things and go, well, I like that and I like that and I don't like that, but I'm going to take a cocktail and use some of those to enhance my own skills.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that as a place to end on for this conversation, because it also loops back to what you were saying earlier around using your life experiences and drawing on your values to understand the work that you would be doing. So, Raslyn, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you very much, Amanda. If you're studying psychology, it can be challenging. The only way you get up Everest is a step at a time. So don't give up. Have faith. It's an incredibly rewarding and enjoyable profession.
Thanks for listening to Professionally Psyched. This podcast wouldn't be possible without the ongoing support of our Psych community. If you'd like to show your support, or if you want us to cover anything on the pod, reach out via our emails. And don't forget, you can listen to full episodes on Spotify.